All righty.
Is it other?
Neyse dadar.
So it is a
Yeah, this a big one. So firstly, Tashi Dele, welcome to everybody. Geshe hopes that you are all well, and he hopes that you are all happy. So according to the words of Aryadeva, we are very fortunate. We are all endowed with great merit, and for that reason, we should engage in our practice joyfully. So even just to be able to have this precious human rebirth and to be able to be in touch with these teachings on love, compassion, and bodhicitta, and just to hear the word wisdom, even if we don't develop it, already we are very fortunate.
So
Geshe is beginning with a verse from the great Aryadeva's 400, and the verse goes something like this: those with little positive force won't even entertain doubts about this teaching, but merely by entertaining doubts about it, your compulsive existence will become threadbare. In other words, it will be worn away.
So if
we understand the meaning of that verse, we will understand that we are people who possess great merit. And when we understand that we are people who possess great merit, we will be able to bring forth great joy. Correct. So then when we are able to hear the teachings on dependent arising or emptiness, whether it is the coarser forms of dependent arising or emptiness, or whether it is the more subtle teachings of dependent arising or emptiness, it is said that the afflictions are already on shaky ground. In other words, they're already easier to diminish.
So the
reason we experience problems, the reason we have difficulties is because of our faulty perception. We believe in that faulty perception and we hold on to it thinking that it is real. That is the cause of so many of our problems. So, of course, within the profound teachings on emptiness, there are some that are subtle and some that are more coarse. But even putting aside talk of a realization, what this verse by Aryadeva is saying is even doubting a little bit, like, is emptiness perhaps like that? We are already shaking the foundations of compulsive existence. In other words, shaking the foundations of samsara. So if we know this, and the reason that we have verses like this is a reminder to help us bring forth confidence, a reminder to help us bring forth a powerful resolve, and a reminder to bring forth joy as we proceed. So that's also the reason why Geshe reminds us about the nature of our mind and reminds us that the nature of our mind is pure luminosity. right? That is the true nature.
다원아 세계로 있을 때 네가서 버튼이 좀 할래비 네 받침 버튼이 지어는 안 좋다 강에 뭐 보지 형데 아티샤 따따 용금 되어서는
But then probably some people are wondering, all right, if you say that like the mind is pure and if you say that the mind is luminous, then why am I experiencing all of the problems and suffering that I'm continuously experiencing? Why do I experience that if the mind is pure?
따따지 용금 되어서는 다 될다 거를 내려와도 못 되나 빼니지요 빼라봐 곧 되고 집에서이나스
So of course, it's not really easy to understand the paradox of our mind's luminosity and at the same time our experience of suffering. But perhaps we could propose an easy example.
빼는 다 저친거 로지요이나 저친거 로노도 세트를 되어res 로시오야 보지요나
로소.
당가로서 정말 로와서 간이지 요서 뒤토는마 원다고 하요라고 지금 간대 되어res
So if we think about an example of a lamp on this table, and the lamp and its light is like the mind, 하영디 가리라고?
하위트 딩거 내가 가요res
로보르기나?
로보르기나 And
we think that there is some sort of pot that is covering that light, preventing the light from getting out. Those are like the adventitious defilements, the afflictions. Yeah. Maybe another example would be to think about these adventitious defilements or these afflictions as being like the skin of an onion, right? Because they're a little bit complicated. There's many layers, but we can think that within that skin is that essence, that light of wisdom we want to activate. So if we peel back those layers of the onion, then the luminosity of the mind can be revealed. Yeah. So there's no doubt that the mind's luminosity is sufficient for us to be able to comprehend, to understand all objects of knowledge. The problem is that potential, that luminosity of our mind is covered by the adventitious defilements, by the afflictions, which are like that skin of the onion.
So therefore,
understanding that to clear away those adventitious defilements and to realize that luminosity of the mind, this is the purpose that the Buddha said, all of the teachings I gave are to bring forth wisdom. So as a first step, let us just take a moment to settle our body and mind in a state of relaxation. Just handing out our prayer books for later. Thank you, Arunits. So let us imagine, just like if you breathe ha on the surface of the mirror and that condensation kind of collapses within itself until it's no longer there. In the same way, imagine that all of the discursive thoughts, all of the distractions where our mind has been going back and forth, that these dissolve into the tsosen, the main mind. And as we focus in on that main mind.
다 열어놓더니 다 가디 다 열어놓는 그런 것이
We understand the nature of that mind, its potential, is something that allows us to improve and improve towards realization.
제일로질 요맘에 뭐지 새로운지 코로나 좀 일레가 비제선 제일로질 요마야 말았어 되는 뭐지 새 코로나를 정말 떼지는데.
And we also understand that just as unpolluted water has that nature of clarity and purity, in the same way, the fundamental nature of our mind is without stains. And just like that clear water through which everything can be perceived, the nature of our mind has that amazing potential of clarity.
가시 새로운지 정말 재미를 쉬어나 새도 정말 가져야 되는 거 가지고 그것이 되는 이제 통을 했는데.
If the mind was the nature of its afflictions, if the afflictions were not adventitious, then that mind would just always continually abide together with those stains. But this is not the case. The stains or the defilements are definitely not the true nature of this mind.
교수님이 처음 봐도 이지 쇼르까지 그게 템포체토나 갈래갈래 컨트롤러스 배웠네. nhiệm vụ 강가 부시와지 그랬어.
And that means that if we're able to tap into the mind's fundamental nature and direct that mind's fundamental nature to positive mental qualities such as love and compassion, slowly the afflicted minds, like anger and so forth, will be diminished, will be cleared away.
교수님이 가장 템포칭 세셔와 세셔마도 이지를 쇼르가 증명해서.
And then think on the basis of tapping into this nature and touching that peace within my mind, I will direct that peaceful mind to the development of love and compassion.
대략은 야와세도 집에다 가시라. 예트시라 이라지.
Therefore, may the Buddhas and their children, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, bestow their blessings to assist me to do this. I will make supplication. So we'll start with the prayers. We'll do the short mandala. And the last bit is the refuge in bodhicitta. Yeah. So another thing, I thank people for bringing things to our attention, like last time, not hearing properly and things. And another issue which we're trying to figure out is that when we do the prayers, often folks at home cannot hear the prayers. So just so you know, we are working on that and trying to figure out the correct setting to prevent that from happening. So yeah, I just wanted to apologize in advance. Okay.
어떤가로서 어느 정도 동거세 나무도 가디나니 뭐 그게 당가로서 저기야 저도 정도도 이제라 어떤 유튜브 시라지 진짜 저도 대치jes.
So if we think about our objects of attainment, in other words, the realizations that we need to bring forth, the realizations that we need to bring forth are love and compassion, as well as the wisdom realizing emptiness.
다 대법의 영화시야 봐라요. 알레 리도 세 좋아지도 레레기면은 다 보게 가요.
But we know, right, if we try to bring those realizations forth, if the body and mind are not in a peaceful and relaxed state, we're not going to be able to engage with love, compassion, and emptiness meaningfully.
다 대법의 세 때에 레레쳐야 사람한테 세 좋아져야 소소소다 사자가 어려워가 이나요. 아니 고어들이 담는다셔도 유명한 때에 세 좋아져야 하래. 리세 아니 나이네서 다시 지내라.
So in terms of the methods through which we can kind of still that mind so that we can use it in meditation, many of you will be familiar with breath meditation, mindfulness of the breath. That is a very powerful and effective way to do it, but also investigating the nature and the links between the body, mind, and the self, and understanding a little bit more about them. That can also be something that makes the mind very peaceful.
तनेओ सोसो था केबा जिनेला अने केबा सोसुन गयारे सोसो जासा ता मोचा जासा लयारवास अने लेका पेरे छासा तो तजी के मोमो जासा तजे साजा लयोबा येना निले शवा छाया से नमदि के सोसो लदा गारी छेगा चे योनायो शलोनी योदा के छिमो तलिगे
लोसो
पेरे छावो तलिगे योदा चे योना तगा रोल मी जिनेला ताचे जिने देला येना ओ तिगे नेवा मेनेला से शवा छाया से
दी de bamenasana
never many.
Never many.
Never machine.
And so probably many of us who are listening today, we are living in like urban areas, right? Cities and towns, most of us. And so oftentimes we'll be facing situations where there is a lot of noise in the environment. But actually, we can still maintain a peaceful mind, even if we are living somewhere noisy. If we take that object that is making the noise, if we take that as our object of focus, as our object of meditation, and contemplate its nature, we'll find that that is a very effective way to reduce the irritation that we might be experiencing because of the noise. So we just analyze it, right? Is this a loud noise or is it a quiet noise? Is it continuous and repetitive? Or is it a one-off? Just by thinking a little bit about its nature, we can relax the irritation that we have around it. How does the noise change? What is the range of its tones and so forth? If we just have this attitude of investigation, we'll feel much less irritated. The power of that noise to disturb us will be greatly reduced. And then in that way, if it's one person who's really noisy or a big gathering of people who are really noisy, we'll still be able to remain undisturbed. So actually, those of us who are maybe living in an environment with some noisy people, if that's causing us a little bit of like irritation or upsetness, by thinking about it in this way, then that noise can actually become an assistance to our mental cultivation, to our training of the mind. And also, in terms of the benefits of our Dharma practice, tapping into the mind's fundamental nature, to the mind's true way of being. Of course, great meditators even, they might start with like as little as 10 minutes, but if they do 10 minutes every day, over months, over years, what they say is that after about a year or so of really developing this, they see that the afflictions of attachment, anger, and so forth are greatly reduced. And also that familiarization with one's mind. The more familiar one is with one's mind and its nature, that acts as a great assisting factor in being able to realize emptiness. Of course, the mind's nature is something that is profound, and that means that that's not something that we're going to be able to kind of have a feeling and experience right away, right? We need to familiarize ourselves. Do you want, so bringing the four elements into balance, let us relax our body and mind. When the body is upright, the channels are upright. When the channels are upright, the wind, the prana can flow. And so what Geshe wants you to do is breathe in gently and exhale with slightly more force, not over the top, but slightly more force, and do that 3 times. Then we think the 4 elements within me are in balance, and I feel at peace. And think in terms of myself, that mind which thinks, that thinking mind has the potential to reach liberation, has the potential to bring forth bodhicitta, has the potential to travel the bodhisattva path, has the potential for Buddhahood, the Buddha nature. Think the aspect of my mind, the emptiness of my mind, and the emptiness of Buddha Shakyamuni's mind, the emptiness of Aryatara's mind is exactly the same emptiness. There is no difference. Not just the emptiness of my mind, but the emptiness of the mind of all beings close to me. And not just the emptiness of the mind of all beings close to me, but the emptiness of the minds of all 6 types of beings within samsara, within cyclic existence. The emptiness of all of their minds and the emptiness of the Buddha's mind is the same emptiness.
so dollar your cute. I live in Paja, and Joy nine. Call me and should you see the sun, or soon just sun door. Only so Jill dead, only your shadow guys. Or did it see in such ways?
In terms of the beings in front of us, the beings that we interact, even the animals, we can't say with certainty that they won't be able to enter and complete the Bodhisattva path before us. We can't say with certainty who will be able to reach that destination first. Therefore, in that aspect, you're all the same.
So like I showed him, Momarasuna in a serate. So much question, and since you was
Bring forth thought that my main task is to take that I call the self or my mind and lead and achieve Buddhahood or enlightenment so that I can help every sentient being reach that sublime state. Bring forth the motivation of bodhicitta.
Believe upon the Nichio, live and believe upon you, in their Karina, because you have a shadow.
I think with this human rebirth, with this human brain and intelligence, if I set my mind to this task, I can definitely achieve it and bring forth a confident joy. So we'll pause there. Geshe was like, he thought my voice was still a little quiet. Could folks hear me or not? You could? Okay, good. I'm glad. Yes, if you ever can't, let me know. Thank you, Suzette, for bringing that to my attention. Ale. The gong was too quiet, apparently. Okay. So everything that we are thinking about and reflecting along in this class, right? It is all for us to be able to reach that ultimate destination. And it is called the king of prayers, but we should understand prayers in the profound sense that these are prayers that are actually an amassing of virtuous karma that is going to be able to ripen our mind to realization. And it is said that, for example, the great disciples of the Buddha, Shariputra and Moggallana, it was just from hearing one single verse of the Dharma that they were able to ripen imprints and achieve liberation. So how did that happen, that seemingly instantaneous realization, just from hearing one verse of Dharma? That happened because Shariputra and Moggallana, over many, many kalpas, accumulated merit. And then when they weren't able to reach the goal in that particular lifetime, they thought, I was not able to bring forth the wisdom realizing emptiness in this lifetime. May I be able to bring forth that wisdom in future lifetimes? And that manifested as the realization at that point. Yeah. And so dedication and prayers are very important, but we can also understand the words of these texts as direct instructions on where we want to go.
Oh, that's so good.
So for those of you who have the text of the King of Prayers with you, please take a look. I believe we are on page 6. And so the section we're in is a series of kind of 16 prayers or aspirations, and we are currently on the 11th of those. And within one of those, there are 8 important points.
This one,
And so these are under a heading called activities. And the first of the prayers is known as the prayer of seeing all the Buddhas and their realms. The prayer of seeing all the Buddhas and their realms.
And that
means to be able to directly perceive the Buddha and the realms and all the beings within it. So sorry, just want to make sure that I'm on the correct page here. Now, so the true Sabin Chikla Tene Chatson wa Tong to be a Diro. Dingela, Ale, oh, yeah. Yeah, do cheat ten, yeah. On one atom I shall see Buddha fields numberless as atoms, inconceivable Buddhas among bodhisattvas in every field, practicing the activities of awakening. So Geshe is explaining like what we mean when we say these atoms. Of course, these atoms are very, very kind of minuscule particles. So they're not something we can get an idea of, but it is said that when the sun rays are shining and we can see those tiny orbs, that gives us an idea of what these atoms might be like. Yeah. So those ones are a little bit subtle, right? Those orbs of the sun's light rays, but we can see them a little bit. Of course, we understand ultimately the atoms are much smaller than this, but this gives us an idea of a visual representation. So in terms of the explanations of these atoms and particles and their relationships, if you're interested in that, you can look at the teachings of the Abhidharma Kosha, and there is also a lot of explanations of these in the Kalachakra Tantra. And as you read those texts, like there's many amazing things to be discovered. So one of the things that is explained there is the formation and the dissolution of the world. So how the formation of the world starts with these small particles and atoms and builds up, and also how the dissolution of the world happens through the kind of dissipating of these atoms and so forth. So in the explanation of the Kalachakra Tantra, when it explains the dissolution of the world, what it sounds like is that these kind of elements of the world, so here when we say the elements, right, I think I should tell people, we're talking about earth, fire, water, and air. So the aspects of those all dissolve into their very sort of finest atoms, those small atoms of those 4 elements, and then those small atoms dissolve into the space-like expanse. So this is the explanation in the Kalachakra Tantra.
아까서라 다 노기 더 갈래 다 걸어요 생제를 내 당한도 내도 되지 배치 뭐요 하러와서 어디라 때네 노기 더 될래 아니 운동을 해서 차야 그거 저게 될 아니 오 사이드 참모 지도 참모 갈래 가는 거 소리야.
And then what happens is through the particles of a space or sky, right? The karma of sentient beings is manifesting. Due to the karma of sentient beings within the space or sky, particles of the other elements, right? Earth, fire, water, and air begin to manifest. And then we have the environment and the sentient beings within it. So another interesting thing is that when we talk about the formation of the world and the dissolution of the world, there's a little bit of a difference. So when we talk about the formation of the world, it is the elements of Gondar. It is on the basis of wind, fire, and water that the dissolution begins to unfold. And the main one out of that is wind. And the interesting thing is that when we talk about the arising of the world, in the text, it doesn't mention fire so much. There may be some exceptions, but in the thrust of the text, it doesn't mention fire so much. It mainly talks about earth, water, and wind. And once again, wind is the beginning point. It's the most important one. Yeah. So, of course, this is a vast topic to which we can come to further discussion later on. Yeah. And so one of the interesting things in those texts, it talks about how 7 of these smaller atoms come together to make a bigger component particle, and how those bigger component particles come together to make an even bigger component particle, and so forth. So this is quite an interesting field of study. Yes, yeah, and those different particles, they have all kinds of cool different names. Yeah. So Geshe gave a talk at U of T recently, and we talked about all of these different particles and their names. So maybe we'll do that here as well. Yeah. So think for a moment about how many of those atomic particles there are in this world. And then think for a moment that upon every single one of those atoms are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Think about that. Not only that, there is a Buddha on every single one of those atoms, and the Buddha's retinue is inexhaustible. It is numberless. So many of you may be familiar with the holy day Lama Buddha's descent from heaven. Sorry. So at that point, to get the Buddha to return from heaven, right, where he had gone to teach his mother, Moggallana went to kind of invite him back. And it is said at that moment that Moggallana was able to perceive all of the countless Buddhas as number equal to atoms, not just of this world, but of all the world systems. And those can be understood to be the emanation of one Buddha. So the Buddha can emanate infinitely, exponentially, in order to serve the benefit of sentient beings. So we're making that prayer to be able to directly see those realms with all of those numberless Buddhas, to be able to see them. But also what we want to do is pray to become a bodhisattva in their retinue. So then the next one is not to just see those Buddhas, but to be able to see their fields. In other words, to be able to see their pure realms. That's what we're talking about in the next verse. So verse 29, perceiving this in all directions, I dive into an ocean of Buddha fields, each an ocean of 3 times Buddhas in the space of a wisp of hair. So I too will practice for an ocean of eons. So just if you think about a wisp of hair, right, that's just to give the idea of a very small space. If you think about the point of your hair, so to be able to dive into that ocean of Buddha fields, not just one, right, but in all directions, in all 10 directions. So when we say ocean, right, ocean is used here because it's like a very, very vast expanse. So imagine a huge, vast expanse filled with these Buddhas, and not just being able to perceive them, to see them, but also being able to interact. And even those very, very subtle Buddha realms that maybe even like tiny, like the atom, just like the tip of a wisp of hair, to be able to perceive every single one of those countless Buddha realms. Oh, do hako yomaren, nakla hako yomaren. So, sorry, Geshe is just explaining here that according to Sutra, right, we have this presentation of there are these numberless Buddha fields, and on like every particle or every atom is a Buddha and Bodhisattvas. And so we understand that conceptually, but to actually understand how this is possible, you get the full explanation of that in Secret Mantra, in the Tantric teachings. So for example, if you take like that flower on the pot that Geshe is holding, and you say that like on each petal of this flower, there are like numberless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it's kind of like, yeah, right. It's like hard to think about. So what is the reason for this? What Tantra tells us is that since Buddhas know all objects of knowledge, then Buddhas are definitely aware of this flower. And because the Buddha's mind can instantaneously travel to any object of knowledge, the Buddhas can definitely travel to that flower. So once the Buddha's mind engages with that object, gongda yugilung, sanggigilung. Yeah. And once the Buddha thinks about that object, it can travel instantaneously based on the power of wind. And because the Buddha's mind and its wind have penetrated that object, for example, the flower, we understand that the Buddha's mind and the wind element of the Buddhas are not something that is limited. They are limitless. Sorry. Konso tsemdang lung di jutubna, konso tsemdang lung kandesla gore, nupa chatong wa yupa, dene dine konso sangi hale pe mambo dang. Right. So the Buddha's mind penetrates that object. The wind element of the Buddha's mind penetrates that object. And because there is no separation between the mind, wind, and body of a Buddha, right? The Buddha's body can appear anywhere. This is the explanation that you find in Tantra. So that is why in the Tantric teachings we speak about the exalted beings, the holy body, holy speech, and holy mind being of one taste. This is what is meant here by one taste. And so why do we want the body, speech, and mind to become of one taste? Well, if we think about ourselves as an ordinary being, right, we have that aspiration to be able to help all sentient beings, but we can only be in one place at once, right? Our body is very limited. For a Buddha, that's not the case. So when we talk about I will benefit all sentient beings, for ordinary beings like us, it's really just an aspiration, right? They're really just words, because we can't even be everywhere to help all of our friends and family members and the people close to us all the time, right? Because we are limited by this body. So this is the reason that the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha are of one taste, and this is also the reason that the body, speech, and mind of a Buddha can penetrate and appear in any object. Oh, right. And so this also explains that story of probably a lot of you are familiar. Do people know the story of the yak's horn with Milarepa and Drechungpa? So that's why Milarepa was able to appear in that yak's horn. And to Drechungpa's perception, his body didn't get smaller, neither did the yak horn get bigger, but his body was just able to kind of appear in that horn. And that is the same reason, right, when we talk about the qualities of the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being. So these two verses are talking about being able to perceive these numberless Buddhas as well as their Buddha fields. In other words, their pure lands. You can also think about it like that. And so then the next one is a prayer to be able to engage into the speech of the Buddhas, the speech of the Buddhas. Thus, I am continually immersed in the speech of the Buddhas, expression that reveals an ocean of qualities in one word, the completely pure eloquence of all the Buddhas, communication suited to the various tendencies of beings. So this is a prayer So this is a prayer taking into account three great qualities of the Buddha's speech. Three great qualities of the Buddha's speech.
다 노지 가서 다 알게 좀 모임 거 와서 다 손지가 수를 예대 또 지대 가려 수에 열어 저지가 예대도 된 봐. 열어 저저 수인죠 봐 수인년 봐 세는 열어 저지야.
So the first of these qualities is to say that the Buddha's speech has 60 characteristics. It has 60 characteristics.
수인죠 봐도 수인년 봐도 아니 다 뒤수대 티와 손지 버려 버리가 와시야 단내서 뭐야.
So these are like how the speech is sweet. It is pleasant to hear. It is something that brings forth bliss in the minds of the listeners and things like that.
어다 던지게 내서 뭐야. 던지게 내서 지야 이거 손지가 변에 치가리나 쇼바도 이제라고 치지 라고 손지 내가 소소 내가 가려는 되고.
The other quality of the Buddha's speech is that the same word, for example, if the Buddha speaks on love and compassion, the same word can be comprehended differently by listeners in the audience exactly according to their affinity and capacity.
그냥 못봐 대반 거지 못봐 거야. 라면 대반 다음에 또 아니 땡주 대반 거지 땡주 수지년도 수면저 많이도 소소고 수지만도 소소고 말해.
So each word can be understood exactly according to the needs of the listener. This means that the Buddha might say one utterance, and that utterance will be understood as teaching impermanence by certain disciples. It will be understood as teaching selflessness by certain disciples. It will be understood as something to do with dependent arising by other disciples, exactly in accordance with their need.
So Lama 걸어서 봤지. 들이 소지가 될 수 있었어. 내가 말씀 될 수 있었어. 걸어서 봐야 되겠네.
So sometimes in the scriptures you get these strange occurrences where like the students will be discussing Lord Buddha's teaching, and then they'll be like, well, the Buddha was talking about this, and then other ones will be, no, he wasn't. He was talking about that, and things like that. Yeah. So that is one of those qualities of the speech. The next one is that the Buddha's speech is completely without faults. It is completely without faults. That means that it is like neither too loud nor too soft. It is perfect. So that means if the speech is completely unimpeded by faults, it can reach the ear of the listener exactly in the right way. Yeah. So like speech, of course, manifests according to karma. Geshe is just remembering that famous story about that being who was criticizing a stupa that was built, and then he came to regret it and offered a bell. So in his next lifetime, he had kind of a strange bodily aspect, but a very beautiful voice.
So
here's probably a little bit like a lot of us are when this stupa was being built. Like, oh God, that thing's too big, right? Not very attractive. What a waste of money, you know, thinking in that way. And in that way, he accumulated some negativity, right? But at the end, when the stupa was completed, somehow he was moved and he thought, actually, you know, what a beautiful, exalted thing. And it was like really wrong of me to kind of criticize it so harshly. And he offered a bell, right? And that bell became the cause of him having pleasant sounding speech. So in other words, to have this kind of speech, which is able to function in this way for sentient beings, not such an easy thing, right? Many causes need be accumulated. Di sumbadi. And it's also important to understand that in terms of the negativities that we accumulate, if like this person, right, we develop some remorse for those negativities, that remorse itself is also an accumulation of merit. And it is also said that when we speak about the practices of purification, such as the 4 opponent powers, if we don't have, it's actually the power of complete eradication, but in English we say regret. And the reason is, if that mind of regret, right, is not fully there, then the purification cannot fully unfold. And of course, when we speak about this mind of regret for the actual activity that we engaged in, the unwholesome activity, which accumulated that negative karma, that's really good to have regret for that. But also regret for the cause. What was the cause behind that compelled us into that action? Another thing is said that if we accumulate this unwholesome action, even if we're not able to complete the full 4 opponent powers, if we bring forth a sincere mind of regret, the ability of that karma to increase, the increasing quality of that negative karma is hindered. In other words, the karma will not increase. So when we read these words and think about these things, right, these are all things that are easy to reflect on and that we can immediately put into practice. And so once again, going to the verse, communication suited to the various tendencies of beings, this goes back to Geshe's original point that whatever is said, it suits perfectly the affinities and the capacities of the multitudes.
So when we read these
And so there's another story related to this, and this is actually related to the teacher of Shariputra and Morgalyayana Putra. And so the teacher, the first teacher of Shariputra and Morgalyayana, he was not a Buddhist, right? He was a holder of what they call outsider tenets, so another spiritual tradition. And so Shariputra and Morgalyayana, they were kind of very close spiritual friends. They got along really well, and they would even sometimes meditate in the same cave. They were also so close that they were able to comprehend the level that each other were at. So if one of them achieved single-pointed concentration, the other one would know, and he would be able to say kind of what level of concentration they had achieved. So they had that kind of close connection. Yeah. But of course, in terms of the actual complete imprints and the sort of level of their minds, it was the Buddha who could understand that completely. So the Buddha knew that they would be his students, but he could understand their minds perfectly. So he knew that if he approached Shariputra and Morgalyayana himself, they would not want to study his teachings. So what he did is there was the group of these five, and I'm sorry, it's embarrassing, but I forget the name of these five original disciples of the Buddha, the five ascetics, right? One of those five ascetics was the supreme in deportment, right? The supreme in external conduct. He knew that would move the minds of Shariputra and Moggallana. So he sent them to meet them first. Tatu. Miche. Zangde. Yeah, so Geshe's giving the names in Tibetan. I'll try to find the Sanskrit names for you next time. It's Tambudi Kadire? Oh, goodness. Okay. If that means something to someone Irish ways, I'm a bit lost at this point, but there are Sanskrit names. I don't know, maybe Dave, if you can find those names for people and put them in the chat, people might like it. The next one is Tatu. Loka, Lumba, Miche, and Songde. So these are the five original ascetic disciples of the Buddha. And the first of these, Koshikuna Denaya, he was the one who first developed the highest level of samadhi. So he was the one who was considered the most exalted. And so the Tatu, who was the supreme in comportment, although not the most realized of the five, he was the one that the Buddha sent to meet Shariputra and Moggallana at first, because he understood perfectly their affinities and capacities, and he knew that he should not go to meet them in that instance. And so Shariputra and Moggallana, they maintained like a Brahmin-like conduct, which means like very perfect behavior and also cleanliness, right? They were really big on maintaining cleanliness. And the second of these five original disciples, Tatu, he was the one who was a kind of supreme in his outer comportment, and also he maintained perfect cleanliness. His clothes were always beautifully arranged and so forth. And so Shariputra and Moggallana, they had an arrangement in terms of securing their alms, right? They were both very serious about meditation, so they took turns in who would go out and beg for alms. So if Moggallana went that day, Shariputra would stay and meditate in the cave. And if Shariputra went, then Moggallana would be able to focus on his cultivation that day. So one day when Shariputra went to the town or wherever to get his alms food, he bumped into the second of those original five disciples, Arya Tatu. And Shariputra, when he first saw Tatu, he thought, what an amazing being in this world who has such perfectly elegant conduct and maintains such a high standard of cleanliness. And so Shariputra, very moved, approached Tatu, and then he asked, where are you from? Who is your teacher? What is the Dharma that you practice? Om ye Dharma. Okay. Yes. So at that time, it is said that Tatu shared the dharani, or the mantra of dependent arising.
하고서 딱 안쪽에 대수들에 에서 테마 찐데만 좀 기빠져 세네라 더가로고 거기 야 동반이 도서
So when Tatu uttered the words of that mantra of dependent arising, it is said that instantaneously Shariputra was able to have a realization of emptiness.
다 때문에 거론이 되는 데서 와서 어떤 거로 파소서 로그로 와서 샤리프야는 뭔가 파서 레비가 코페도 뭔가 하려니 And
of course, when Shariputra returned to the cave, we talked about the close connection that Shariputra and Moggallana had. So Moggallana was already amazed because he realized that Shariputra had reached a very profound realization. And so Moggallana said to Shariputra, like, you've changed. Not only is there kind of a new and most significant realization that has manifested in your mind, but also even like the appearance of your body and certainly your conduct are completely transformed. Yeah, and so then because they had this kind of agreement as spiritual friends to explain their understanding to each other, Shariputra explained the realization that he had experienced to Moggallana. And so accordingly, Shariputra entered the Om Ye Dharma Hetu Pravava, that mantra of dependent arising. But the first time Moggallana was like, I didn't hear that right. Can you say it again? But after either, Geshe's not sure if it was the second utterance or the third utterance, Moggallana was able to bring forth that same realization. And then also Shariputra and Moggallana came to realize that this supreme realization that we've ever experienced, they come based upon an utterance of the Blessed One, the Buddhas. So we must become bhikshus, we must become monks and follow that teacher. So Shariputra and Moggallana called a meeting of all of their respective students because they both had their own students, and they said, you can decide to do whatever you want, but we've achieved this realization based upon the teachings of the Blessed One. So both of us are going to go into the homeless life as bhikkhus under the Buddha, and so we will not be staying in this place. So Geshe said, what nice teachers Moggallana and Shariputra were, not saying you must become Buddhas because that's what I'm doing, right? They gave their students the choice. So that's another part of the story that kind of struck him. So just to really understand how this relates, it perfectly illustrates the communication suited to the various tendencies of beings. The Buddha knows, and the Buddha can manifest exactly at the right time to help those respective disciples in the best way. So until I achieve my own state of enlightenment, may I be able to, I pray to be able to enter into that ocean of the speech of the Buddha. And we understand that behind that wish to enter into the speech of the Buddhas, of course, we also pray to be able to achieve the qualities of the speech of a Buddha ourselves. So in that way, it is also an aspiration. So then in order, of course, to have this realization that we mentioned in this story, then one must be able to penetrate the teachings of both coarse and subtle dependent arising. And so in accordance with that, we will now briefly discuss Lama Tsongkhapa's in praise of dependent origination. So Yeshe said, sorry, like today it was a lot of stories. You're relate a lot of the stuff to the stories, but anyway. Oh,
야, 다 가서 야 tumba 땡주게 되는 것을 때라. tumba tum바도 땡주니 기바인 바다라.
loso.
안에 다 되면서 되시비요. 레스.
quando chipa yamba niga ke chamboyo.
다 니가 기바인 바.
Ale.
tumba 땡주 땡주 tumba.
Loso.
여하면 하거든요.
So we were discussing just a little bit about emptiness and dependent arising and how they are non-different, how they are of the same nature.
그래서 다 대지바 예마다는 것을 따라 저쇼네 제시시 저쇼세네 다 저쇼도 그 과자가 차는 제시다 도지
loso
오 제자가 차는 파트 제시다 도지.
So why do we say that they are the same? Because they are the same in helping us to understand and refute the object of negation. And they also both enable us to realize what is to be taken up or understood.
That's what
Kawa do. Dechu Kyugi Dempala. Denchum. That's what Kawa do. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so we are talking about verse 11. For you, when one sees emptiness in terms of the meaning of dependent origination, then being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid functions do not contradict. So first, here Lama Tsongkhapa is praising when he says, for you, he's talking about the Buddha. For you, when one sees emptiness in terms of the meaning of dependent origination, this means that the Buddha is able to see the non-contradictory nature of the non-contradictory nature of emptiness and dependent arising. And in this way, from understanding this, the mind is able to understand the realities of the Four Noble Truths, cause and effect, karma, all of those exactly in accordance with the way things really are, their ultimate mode of abiding. And from seeing the essential oneness of emptiness and dependent arising, then the enlightened being is able to clear away the two obscurations, the knowledge obscurations and the afflictive obscurations, as well as the imprints left behind. Some know what you get. As beginners, and this is an important point, because as beginners, when we contemplate emptiness and dependent arising, it may seem that emptiness conceptually kind of contradicts and harms our understanding of dependent arising. And similarly, that dependent arising may be somehow contradictory to emptiness. So as a beginner, this idea may come forward. And so it's from seeing dependent arising and emptiness as unrelated or even somehow contradictory. Like we might see them like heat and cold. So the hotter something gets, the more that cold is harmed. The colder something gets, the more that hot is harmed. And they seem to cancel each other out. So because that can be such an obstacle to bringing forth realization, this is the reason that the Buddha of Wisdom, Manjushri, instructed Lama Tsongkhapa, do not focus solely on emptiness, but also take into account appearances. And we can understand the kind of meaning behind that is paying attention to appearances means to take into account, to pay attention to dependent arising.
This one,
Ale, loso. So the emptiness of dependent arising is like a magician's illusion. So just because just because something does not exist inherently, just because something does not exist inherently does not mean that it does not exist at all. Yeah. So in the Buddhist understanding, when we are investigating these teachings, there is a mind which is investigating relative truth or conventionalities, and there is a mind which is investigating ultimate truth or the final mode of abiding. So when the mind is focused on ultimate truth and it is looking at things, it understands that things are not dependently arisen. They do not exist from their own side. They are empty of inherent existence, right? That is the focus. So some meditators, when they are investigating like that, they'll say, well, then there is nothing there at all, right? There is no self, there is no phenomena, there is no self of persons, there is nothing there at all. Oh, so the understanding that Tsongkhapa is pointing to here is that, yes, there is that lack of inherent existence. That mind which is focused on ultimate truth, it is going to realize or cognize the emptiness of the objects, not the objects or the phenomena themselves. Yeah. But that doesn't get rid of the conventional existence of those objects, right? There is conventionalities. we could only say that things do not exist at all if we are focusing the mind on relative truth, trying to realize the nature of relative truth, and we come to this idea that there is nothing there at all. But we see that that is not the case, right? There are conventionalities. Yes, yes. So this goes back to the story Geshe told last time about the tsampa and the flute. When you are playing the flute, you can't eat the tsampa, but it doesn't mean that tsampa isn't there at all. Similarly, when we are meditating to understand emptiness, we're meditating on ultimate truth, but that doesn't mean that the conventional truth somehow disappears. So when we see the non-contradictoriness of emptiness and dependent arising, when we see the oneness of emptiness and dependent arising, we can see that that car or that house or that person, whatever conventional object is appearing, that it is a dependent arising of the coming together of many causes and conditions, but that it does not exist inherently. So that is the benefit of being able to see and understand both emptiness and dependent arising. And so many of our afflictions, so much of our upsetness, of our mental projection, and so forth, this comes due to the afflictions of seeing the object through the lens of attachment or anger and adding layers onto it, reifying its solidity in a way that is not in accordance with its ultimate mode of abiding. So that's how we have to understand the importance of both dependent arising and emptiness, and how they are both sort of refuting mistaken understanding. So in this way, we've covered just a little bit of in praise of dependent arising. And we will come to more of discussion of this later on. So then, so with a joyful mind, then let us dedicate the merits. Kundu Sambo Deyo Deje Deda Kungi Jesu Daru Gewa Dida Tamche Ramdu Dusun Shebe Gewa Tamche Ngowa Gangla Chodu Ngaba Dagi Geve Sawa Dikun Kyo Zambo Chuchi Radu Mowa
也在英国掉了边，他们就入籍，他不是出去了，不是出国那个，现在那可以加起朋友。
Through the merits that we have collected, may all sentient beings be able to bring forth perfectly method and wisdom within their mind, and may they be able to cross the ocean of samsara and reach the shore of enlightenment. It is on the basis of method and wisdom that temporary happiness is achieved. May they achieve that. It is on the basis of method and wisdom that ultimate happiness is achieved. May they achieve that. And from bringing those two forth, may the sun of happiness shine equally upon all 6 types of sentient beings within samsara. So pause there. So are there any questions? I think it should be on, Arunas. I may ask you to turn it up. Let me just see if, Dave, can you say something just so I can make sure my speaker's turned on?
How do I turn it up?
I think it's probably easier if I do it. Just give me a second.
You got to teach me how to do it so you can do it.
It's also hard because how you're starting to turn around and see it. I mean, there we go. Okay.
Oh, that's easy. Yeah, I can do that.
So go ahead. We should be able to hear you now. Oh, I still can't hear you, Dave. That's weird.
Uh-oh, I hear something.
I think Dave may have a problem. Can someone else speak?
Hi, Geshe, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I was reading about how Saraha warns against getting stuck in voidness, or belief in voidness prevents us from remaining in reality to help other beings out of suffering. Can you speak to the balance between emptiness and bodhicitta and ways to maintain that balance? And if we diligently practice relative bodhicitta, then absolute bodhicitta emerges on its own?
Just can you turn down a bit? Okay, I got your question, I think, but you said you began it with a quote with somebody says. I didn't get the name of the person who has said this.
Saraha. Saraha, I believe I pronounced it right.
No, you did pronounce it right. I pronounced it wrong. It's a long you got it. Yeah. Saraha nanso di tompani gokor dene tompani gokor dene naronso jangchu gisem samsam ke tugimenduas roa dene nanso di jangchu gisem tam kandes lagore tompani kene jangchu gisem di magoyachi kandes chik sogo dire duasa. Yeah. Can you say the question again, please?
Yes. Saraha warns against getting stuck in voidness. Belief in voidness prevents us from remaining in reality to help other beings out of suffering. So the question is, can you speak to the balance between emptiness and bodhicitta and ways to maintain that balance? And if we diligently practice relative bodhicitta, then absolute bodhicitta emerges on its own?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, no, I got it now. So dene nanso di chik kandes lagari saraha sena di drupto di company di go korne dene nanso di semshen ropache samsam nyotra yeres karin sena nanso di kunsok tempa dabuchik donang tegimen duas dene nanso di kunsok tempa donang matena konso di ropache tugyo mares dene nanso di dundam jangchu gisem dang kunsup jongchap gisem konso gewa mepa tang dundam jangchu gisem la tene kunsup jangchu gisem yapo yongya kandes nongo. Also, if I can ask people to mute themselves except when you're asking a question,
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Thanks.
Yeah, that they do was stand on you watch na. Can this say that you go down
So to answer this question, yes, like we understand that in the beginning, this is difficult because when we're doing placement meditation, as a beginner, you can't meditate on both ultimate and relative truth at the same time.
단 너를 집어 지나세는 거 소도 이게 총이데 소로가 사그야 이자 가오모 소지도 발가야 됐도 되게.
And it's because that engagement at the same time is not possible, right? That the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom cannot be accumulated simultaneously, right? In the sutra presentation, they have to be accumulated separately. And because of that, it can take many kalpas, many eons to reach the final goal. So in the beginning, to sort of prevent us from falling into this fault that Saraha mentioned, we want to actually do both practices. So sometimes we'll be meditating on love, compassion, and the method side of the path. At other times, we'll shift our focus and be focusing more on emptiness, the ultimate nature of reality. But actually, what happens is once we bring forth an understanding of emptiness that is refined, this will only help and strengthen our love and compassion. It will not hinder them. So that's why Lord Milarepa said, having realized emptiness, I brought forth true compassion. But of course, we need to develop both of the practices in the beginning sort of level, because if we just focus on emptiness and don't pay any attention to love and bodhicitta, to love and compassion, we won't be able to bring forth that love and compassion, right? It's only at the more advanced stage where the emptiness is going to reinforce that. Yeah. But it's important to understand that this limitation that Geshe was explaining, this is when we're really talking about placement meditation, right? Where you're single-pointedly focusing on an object. Then you can't do love and compassion and emptiness at the same time. But when we are doing analytical meditation, it is said it's a little bit like a dream, the space of the mind, right? So it's not just one thing that you see in a dream. You can be looking at different things. So even if you're mainly doing an analytical meditation on emptiness, for example, still, because it's analysis, sentient beings, what they're experiencing, wanting to free them, can come into the picture when we're doing analytical meditation. So we might think like we bring forth emptiness when we understand that things do not exist from their own side. They are not inherently existent. But yet there are still those sentient beings left behind who are troubled, who are suffering in samsara, right? There's the space in the mind in analytical meditation to have both of those happening. And so that is, an analytical meditation rather than a single-pointed placement meditation. So what Saraha might be warning about here is becoming like a foe destroyer, right? So just from focusing on emptiness, then they achieve that state of liberation for themselves alone because they didn't cultivate love and compassion. And then having achieved that state of liberation for themselves alone, that bliss of liberation is so intense that they could abide there for many kalpas, many eons, until they're going to be able to start cultivating to really help sentient beings. Yeah. And so this kind of advice is actually similar to Manjushri's advice to Lama Tsongkhapa, right? Not to neglect appearances, right? Not to neglect conventionalities, things on the level of relative truth. So did that answer your question at all?
Yes, and it reminds me of another teaching on the paramitas, where you practice the first 5 paramitas, and then wisdom, it just comes up by itself. You don't have to do anything with the pure motivation.
Ko sungshu yenda chi chen songa rwa nganso di parchin chuki nanglola parchin nga halepe yapo senana tene parchin chupa shiragi parchin ko rang shingi chi yongire do halepe uzu jagumares ko di da wachi koson. Definitely the previous 5 of those paramitas, of those perfections, can assist the bringing forth of wisdom. However, there's a caveat here. If we just practice those like 5 previous perfections of like generosity, ethics, and so forth, and we don't turn our attention to the cultivation of wisdom, even if those other 5 perfections are quite high level, we are still said to be like a person walking around without eyes, because we don't see the ultimate nature of reality. Yeah. But definitely those are application of those previous 5 perfections. They help the bringing forth of wisdom. And we can see that, for example, in the story that Geshe mentioned of Shariputra and Mogayana. I think Arunas has a question. Go for it.
Okay, you may need to repeat it because I don't have.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if folks can hear him, and if not, I'll repeat it.
Thanks for talking about conventional reality and ultimate reality coexisting. It is my understanding of the reason why conventional reality can coexist with ultimate reality, because it is in conventional reality where karma is created. Because it has an effect, even though it is dependent arising, it can create karma and so on.
Did everybody hear Arunas? Okay, great. Okay, good. So I don't have to repeat it. Yes. Nganso di kunzup dempa dondam dempa gewa me pares chikres hakoya korongi koya di rwa nganso kunzup dempa samlo tangna rwa kunzup dempa nganso le latene chungi res rwa nganso le di sapayen sang le je di kadine chik yores then it dempa drupdong madrup yina yangs datum lady yores ane legi drebu chik yores chetang kandes laukare kunzup dempa de tugi yores dundam dempa yuna yang di dabore resa
ya ndawore mo kunzup dempa ya tinga kisen dogedo ya ten te tagaro ni nes tagaro re kisonsa ina ite do dempa koro le resa pecheru to le te
kunzup dempa dundam So Geshe agrees with the statement, except we can't just say conventional or relative truth is only cause and effect, but we can say cause and effect or karma are conventional truths or relative truths. But yes, the point here about even if we understand the ultimate mode of abiding of objects as being without inherent existence, right? They are not inherently existence according to ultimate truth. They are still operating on the level of cause and effect, right? Cause and effect is still there. It is not negated, right, by ultimate truth. Absolutely. And also, if we talk about relative or conventional truth, we have to understand that this is something extremely vast, because basically every object of knowledge aside from emptiness is conventional or relative truth. Yeah.
또야라 체메 또야라 다 노래 때때지 요하레스
니가 세마토예요 그래서.
야 체메 또야라
that's a-
as como se ni tu 그래서
Nula kare tobiere, Nicola kare, super sure. And just when we talk about the realization of ultimate truth and conventional truth, which realization has to come first? This is actually, there's a lot of disagreement about that. There's a topic of debate.
ganzo yenda ta oman jibano kzo demba ta se cheba de do demba ta ju cheba te kzo demba to ha ko dijela de do demba ha ko res ne je jani
Ale, umala jubala tene. So according to the understanding of Geshe-la's tradition, according to the Madhyamakavattara, the Umala Jupa, it is first upon penetrating the reality of conventional or relative truth, then one has the understanding of ultimate truth. So the conventional comes before the ultimate. Tambo kunzob demba dene dono.
ta kashi kzo demba o mare se no de ni andi putu de ga de jela o de la
So that's the Sera understanding, but in some colleges of Drepung and Ganden, they actually don't agree with that.
ta tenda ni se a ta de no da ka wa ni ngi ya se kzo demba te kzo chamo ina ani je de demba res
Loso.
kzo demba kzo chamo se na
Yeah.
kzo chamo se no tu mani jila tu ka
So why there is how Sera would answer this, it seems, from what Geshe-la is saying, is that okay, there's some truth in saying that ultimate has to be realized before conventional, but actually it's just the subtle conventional truths that have to be realized subsequent to realizing ultimate truths. So most conventional truths, most relative truths are realized before ultimate, but then only the very most subtle conventionalities, those are realized after ultimate.
kzo no ja chong mo ko sa kzo ngi ke ji sa dian ju ko xie sa di ba de zo do
Ah,
dian ju ro ba de ni le do
yeah.
dian ju ro ba ta la dian ni
Yeah.
tu mani do
Yes, yeah.
tu mani do cai ji le de ne rin bo ma do ba dian ju chamo de do
And this actually fits in with what Geshe-la explained previously, that it is dependent arising, course dependent arising, which is realized as the first step. Following that, one realizes emptiness. And then after that realization of emptiness, one has a complete understanding of subtle dependent arising. Same principle.
ta te kzo sa pa ja je de ji ba res kzo ro pe ne mo mo ji ta la dian ni
Yeah.
tu mani do res
So same with conventional or relative truth, right? On the focus of the method side of the path, though those coarser levels of relative truth are realized, then there's a realizing of emptiness, ultimate truth.
tu mani do ne le rin bo ma do ba no ja de si do so na
Yamcha they do.
no ja ma de si do sa so na so o de ba me na me ko ma de sa wa she ke ka ngam de sa ha ko so na kzo chamo do
Then when one enters meditative equipoise on emptiness, has that realization of emptiness, and one emerges from that meditative equipoise, then the meditator thinks, oh, I must not completely neglect relative truth, and the most subtle level of relative truth is penetrated.
this one o ta dian ju chamo kzo chamo ni do ji ba de da
So it follows when we talk about dependent arising on the coarse level before emptiness, subtle level after emptiness is the same with a relative and ultimate truth, right? Coarse relative truth before ultimate truth, subtle relative truth after ultimate truth.
dian ju chamo do kzo chamo se na
Yeah.
so tu kzo de ma res
Yeah.
to ni le tu ka cha mas
So this is also a paradox when we talk about subtle dependent arising. Subtle dependent arising is relative truth, but subtle relative truth is harder to penetrate than ultimate truth. So it has to follow the realization of ultimate truth. So thank you for the question, Arunas. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please.
This is Prachi here. So when we talk about anxiety, the first step to handle anxiety is to know the reason why you're anxious. So with mindfulness, you come to the understanding of why you're anxious. And when you find the reason for your anxiety to be uncertainty, how do you deal with that?
Chiwa Dire, thank you for the question. chiwa dire nganso sem sagi sigi yana rwa nganso nangpa nangula nangshu nangula nganso jempala tene sagi sigi gi gyumsen sel go gire duas sagi sigi gi gyumsen selne dene sagi sigi gi gyumsen tempo mepa yana rwa nga ngepa rayo mare denden res lab to bio mares kadine denden mepa dabochi gyumsen di yana dene sagi sigi di kandes mepa so resa.
We just said the mena.
Yeah, denden mare. Sagi sigi gi gyu denden mepa ginetsu dires. Rwadi denden chagires denden chagamares nganso lab to gimendua. Dela tenen nganso sagi sigi chana di kandes mepa so gres sagi sigi.
Maybe that they are determined to us. Just the coral so in the tender.
So there's no reason for the anxiety because we should understand that the uncertainty is simply that fact of nature. So
just coral near September member. Yeah, just shoot the we target jet in the member so Hakosasuna.
Yeah.
Then could Jemia in the target to December to us.
Ale.
So shoot drop a cell.
You may person.
The same Mabala. Target Joko at the moment, I just say.
Ale, losa. So if we understand that uncertainty is not really a reason for anxiety, then we will understand that the cause of the anxiety is something faulty. Then we can clear away the cause and get rid of the anxiety. No, I don't think so. No. Cool. I don't think this was the answer you were looking for, so I'm going to try to probe further. Sagitsigi, nganso denden yomares, momba karechung da machung hako gimetsang, then it's sagitsigi chagires. I think now we can get a clear answer. Sorry.
Yeah.
That is that. That's also in a takaze about to your two ways.
Tap.
Yeah, yeah, or the BJ to be. In a touching Karsakata, tie about Kazas holding in the pipe, which to you to ways.
Yeah.
Danny, courage to much is at that's a second on a pedum duties.
So basically, all that we can do is try to apply the methods so that the future situation comes out well. But we're never going to be able to completely control what the future result is. If we understand that we can't control the future result and let go of that, then we'll see there's no reason to be anxious.
So target the social answer that they put in you are was tell her level touch much tattoo and all that.
Yeah.
Because that thing you want to be in a
the problem is we are holding on to that uncertainty. And because we are holding on to that uncertainty and cannot accept it for what it is, this causes us anxiety. Another thing that we could do is simply look in the world at all of the people who are in situations far more serious than ours, and in that way, reduce our anxiety. So there is definitely a problem there. There is that uncertainty, right? We can't make sure that things always work out in the way that we want to, but we don't need to focus on that uncertainty and make it into a bigger problem than it is. So that's really all we can do is kind of try to cultivate a method to be able to accept that uncertainty.
Yeah, I think this is the answer I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Awesome. No, I'm glad we got it for you. So of course, Geshe said that, that doesn't mean that when we have an aim that we want to achieve, that we don't pray for assistance to the holy beings, right? To the Buddha, Tara, and so forth, wishing for that aim. But we also have to be able to accept that it's not always going to unfold according to plan.
Yeah.
Another way is to transform this through, for example, if we don't meet our aim, right? If the thing doesn't work out as we planned, have a difficulty because of that, then we think, through my experiencing this difficulty of my wishes not being fulfilled, may this purify the cause of the lack of fulfillment of wishes of all sentient beings. May I purify their karma for them. Then we can transform that obstacle into the path.
Oh, that is it. The new Momo,
So we have a lot of methods just to change the angle that we're thinking about that uncertainty. And if we're aware of that, then we'll see the uncertainty is not a reason for anxiety. So just try those different methods.
Yeah, this is really helpful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I glad it was useful. I see a hand. I think it's Dave. Go ahead, Dave. I can't hear you. Have to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you, Geshe, for the last part of that question, because I was going to venture a comment, but Geshe said what I was going to say, so I think if our karma is really heavy, then we will have some kind of anxiety. But I think that when our karma starts to purify, we become less anxious. We grasp less at things, and so our anxiety diminishes when our negative karma is gone. Then we become less anxious. I think it's like that. And then as Geshe said, if we have a confidence that we can deal with difficult experiences by having a familiarity with transforming them, then there's also less cause for anxiety.
Dave Chena nanso di tsagi tsigi couple la rwa nanso digpe le la tene tsagi tsigi mambo do rwa tene nanso digpa jangna perda dorje samba dang so nyamlen chena tene nanso digpa jana digpe le tes nyungru drona tene yang tsagi tsigi gisem nyungru drogi do di chokchikche chokyenda dila nanso di kaneslogare chugi nanglola tapshe mambo yores tsagi tsigi gisem di nyungru tang gi tap mambo yores di tengso chik yona tene yang tsagi tsigi tes nyungru drogi do kochena DJ
the more tanging mangazo tangi le toya okay Geshe mas the more
le daya asena drogi na
maybe tangi Geshe mas yenda kanga lo ni te taba sho so no tona
So Geshe agrees. He agrees with the 2 points that Dave made, and he said that in terms of some of the most powerful purification, this actually happens when we say, through me experiencing this, may all the karma of other sentient beings to experience it be completely cleared away. If we can have conviction and really feeling that, that is a tremendous purification. Yeah, so lots of different methods to sort of think about this as dealing with anxiety. I think I see another hand. Is it Emily?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
I just wanted to mention that I find it really useful to stay in community. So Sangha and events like this are really important for me.
Yeah, like you mean as a way to deal with anxiety or just in general?
Yes.
Ko chena di nanso sem tsagi tsigi yo pe kabla nanso pena gedun ko sam nanso chocho tang yam de na sam pento chambo yo je do sa.
Chito ya.
No, chocho. Yes. If we surround ourselves with good friends, wise and knowing friends, then yes, this can absolutely be an assist to helping us to reduce our anxiety. Yeah. Yeah. So I think thank you everybody for So Geshe was just also saying that if we have a feeling that we are surrounded by the actual Sangha jewel, that means the Arya and the holy beings, such as the Buddha, such as Tara, whichever of those beings move our mind the most, this can also be very helpful for helping us feel less nervous, less discouraged. So that's another method, to know that those holy beings, those Arya beings, are always there.
다 소소 보겠다 대화도 이 지금 노마도라 마동이네서 벌써 기가 왔어.
And so it's just we just lack the wisdom to be able to perceive them directly and the faith to really know that they are there. But otherwise, those holy beings are always available to help us, actually.
봐봐 도매겠더니 저와서 받았더니 저런 이지 추야를 잘하기 쉬워래.
So remember at first Asanga, right? He was in that 12-year retreat and he only was able to see Maitreya at the very end, and he was kind of upset and he said, "Have you no compassion? You only show up now." Kind of thing.
저런 년만 동번이 나도 이렇게 놓치수는데.
And then Asanga said, "I've been there the whole time," and gave kind of an exhaustive list of all the things he'd done since the very first year. Yeah.
다 던지지레스 또 저기 아시타게 책에서 소소 강의 때 밤에 와서 패도들도 대야보다.
The other thing that we also have to understand is just to make a decision to try to let go of our anxiety. Just think, is this anxiety something that is benefiting me or not? And have a real conviction that it's of no benefit.
다 델리 다 가려요나 배제도. 아니 저와 또 터는 버려. 또 마터나 달래 되긴 지레서 대실레를 찾으러 왔어.
And then on that basis, we say, I want to get rid of this anxiety. Then we think, is there a method I can apply? We try to apply some different methods. And if we're still experiencing the anxiety, we understand that, yes, like this is still some karma that I need to move through. And we start trying to accept that anxiety, maybe.
Listen.
Yeah. So did we cover everybody's question? Did anyone have anything else before we go?
No, this session was really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. It is so nice to gather with Dharma friends, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So, and next week there will be a story because we prepared another story, so there'll be another story next week. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Yeah, we're all waiting for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I didn't do that. No.
Yeah, so go down there.
Where?
Thank you, everybody.
My hand, right?
That's a top. Oh.